So Michael should be on here somewhere. Michael, I want to jump you onto the session here now. Let's see, there you are. I'm going to promote you to co-host, and you should be able to start sharing your screen and your mic. Let me know if you have any issues or anything, but Michael, super excited for your session here. I was telling everybody earlier that you're pretty much the OG, the original who created tiny house insurance for tiny homes on wheels and whatnot. So definitely excited to hear what you have to share with everybody, because obviously once people have their tiny house, they want to make sure they can insure it and protect their investment. But awesome. Thank you so much for your time jumping on here, Michael. We're super excited to hear everything that you're going to be sharing with us. And yeah, sorry I took a minute of your time, but without further ado, I can jump off and let you go for it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so what I'm kind of going to go over is just a little bit about tiny house insurance, a little bit about my agency, about myself, because it's something that really, I guess, doesn't come across a lot of people's mind when they're looking for a tiny house to purchase or oh, I don't know what happened there. Um, I'm not sure if I got disconnected or I got dropped or whatnot. But either way, um, as I was saying, um, so yeah, tiny house insurance is something that people really don't think too much about. So I try to basically provide a lot of clarity in that field. It's not necessarily complicated, at least not with our agency, but a lot of customers come to us um, kind of in a loss, basically. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go over a couple things and just kind of go from there. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat, or at the end of my presentation, if we have enough time, I could probably. I'm not sure if people have the opinion or the option to say something. If the mic's always going to be muted, but if worst case scenario in the chat. So let me see here. So let me see here. I think there we go. All right. So Mac Insurance, tiny house and alternative living insurance. So we do tiny houses. We also do yurts. We didn't do yurts for a while. Now we're doing yurts again. And there's probably a couple other things that we also can insure that that are tiny house or alternative living related. So a little bit about Mac Insurance. Let's see here. So we're independent brokerage for insurance. So we actually we're a full service agency. We do the typical personal lines like auto and home. We do mainly tiny house, business insurance, and Medicare. That's our main things in our insurance agency. But our tiny house insurance, I mean, that's a big part of our agency. We've been around since 2013, so about 11 years now. And like I mentioned earlier, we specialize in tiny house and alternative living since 2016. So a grand majority of that. The staff includes myself, Peter, and Lorna. Peter and Lorna are our tiny house specialists. They take care of new business and renewals. And we're located out of Portland, Oregon, which is kind of you could say, it's one of those cities where tiny houses kind of first started. Definitely, I would say uh, one of the first cities. So the types of tiny house insurance out there. A lot of people get these confused, whether it's the type of insurance or the terminology or the coverage, because a lot of people come up to me and be like, well, this is a park model RV. That's not the same thing. That's two separate things. But so basically there's RV insurance, um, which is basically for RVs, and there is tiny houses that are built to an RV code that can also qualify for RV insurance. It's not something I would recommend, and I'll get to that later. There is mobile home and park model insurance. These are typically for kind of like manufactured homes that are under 400 square feet. You can get a manufactured home or mobile home policy on them, and that also applies to park model insurance. Uh, these type of homes are easier to insure. More companies do insure them because they're mostly stationary and they are built to a code that has been around for a very, very, very long time. Mobile homes have been around for, I mean, long time basically. So insurance has been in place for those type of homes for a long time, and we can still insure these in our tiny house program. There are instances where if they are fairly remote, if they are built maybe a little bit differently than the typical mobile home or park model code, our policy could be a great fit for that. There's also van conversion. So a lot of people say I have a tiny house on wheels, and what they actually mean is a van or a schoolie on wheels. I mean, well, obviously on wheels, but it's not the same thing as a typical tiny house on wheels. It's a van or schoolie conversion. So that's not the same thing either. Um, and then there's the actual tiny house homeowners insurance program. And that's our program. So it's a program that's specially built to insure tiny houses. So with the RV, the mobile home, the van conversion type of insurance, um, they are trying to basically fit a triangle into a circle. Um, it's not always the best fit, and not all tiny houses are going to fit in these building codes either. And if they are insurable, let's say under an RV policy does have a lot of restrictions and exclusions. So, for example, um, with RV insurance, if you have, uh, if you live in it full time, well, a lot of RV insurance companies don't allow full time. It's called full timer insurance. They won't allow that. If you move often, RV insurance also excludes a lot of moves. It's not something that is meant to be used as a primary. And that's also another thing. Well, I guess with the full timer and primary, that's the same thing. But that's kind of a lot of things that tiny home owners kind of do is they're mobile. Some of them are at least more mobile than others. Um, and some of them live in it full time. And also with RV insurance, you cannot rent out your tiny house. There's no Airbnb or rental type policy in existence for RV insurance. So a big thing that our tiny house policy does do. And so what does not qualify? I think this is something that has become more and more common. So as I've seen the tiny house industry evolve, there has been a lot of you could say creativity on what you can make into a tiny house, and it just doesn't always work that way. So people take Home Depot sheds and they convert them to what they call a tiny house, but really it's not a tiny house, it's still a shed. And there's not an insurance policy out there that can insure a standalone shed. It just it's not something that exists. Same with converted trailers. So this is like a semi trailer. People take semi trailers and they convert them into livable homes. And again, there's not a type of insurance out there that will solely insure a trailer, much less for someone who wants to live in it. So it's not something that can work. Um, Self-converted vans, there is some liability coverage just so you can be street legal, but most people are trying to find coverage for the whole conversion itself. So if it was in an accident, the money it would take to repair it to how it was, yeah, that coverage is very limited. Um, if you have it professionally done, it's much easier to get coverage. Something I also forgot in the last slide, we also do insure container homes. Container homes we do insure in our tiny house program, so that does qualify. So types of insurance to be aware of or coverage can include, here we go, just select all that. So this is coverages you should be looking at when you're trying to get a quote or basically shopping around. But like I said, no one's going to offer an insurance policy like we do. But if you are trying to shop around, like let's say you have an RV tiny house and you're looking for an RV quote, things to look at is the dwelling, which is basically coverage for the actual tiny house. You want to make sure that it is adequate, especially if it is self-built. So a lot of people, they say, well, it cost me $40,000 to build my tiny house. Well, to replace it may cost a lot more than 40,000. And when you under-insure a tiny house, even though maybe you're okay receiving 40,000, you'll just build a new one. Insurance doesn't work that way. Insurance is meant to uh, give you your house, your car, whatever it may be that you're insuring, to give it back to you in the shape that it was before a loss. So if $40,000 is not enough for the insurance company, because they're the ones trying to cover it, not you. If it's not enough money for them to replace it, you're not going to get your 40 grand. You're going to get a much less amount. And that's typical in all types of insurance. It's just that a lot of people are not aware of, but it does happen where you underinsure something and you get even a lot less than what you thought you insured it for. There are penalties involved. So you want to make sure that the number is accurate of what it costs to replace. And even then, a lot of policies out there do not provide replacement cost. They provide what's called actual cash value, which takes depreciation to account. Our policy doesn't take depreciation to account. We actually will replace it as long as the dwelling amount is accurate. For those who are typically stationary, there is separate structures, and this could be like a little shed. This also can include rain collecting systems or solar panels. That would be insured under your separate structures. It's basically any structure that is not permanently attached to your tiny house. Personal property, this is all the stuff inside your tiny house. So this is your clothes, your furniture, your kitchen utensils, things like that. Everything that is not bolted down in your tiny house. This would not include appliances. Appliances are going to be part of the dwelling, but everything that could, let's say, fall out or shake in your tiny house is going to be considered personal property. Then you have the liability portion, and liability is what protects the homeowner or the landlord, if you rent it, from lawsuits against you. So if you have someone who is hurt on your premise and wants to sue you, this is the most common type of lawsuit, your liability covers you. If you were to injure somebody even outside of your premise, your liability also follows you. Your liability follows not just your tiny house, but it follows you no matter where you are in the world. It's a really, really important coverage because basically anyone who's getting sued is not going to get sued for a small amount of money. It's always going to be a large amount of money. So we start our liability at 300,000, and that's kind of our agency standard, because most claims that we have seen in liability, they are in the hundreds of thousands. So it's something that's always included in our policies. Oh, and theft of the tiny house and personal property. So things we can cover. We can cover the theft of the actual tiny house. So if someone were to hook it up and steal it, we can cover that. And if someone were to break into your tiny house and steal your stuff, we can also cover that. And year-round mobile coverage. So you can move state to state. That's no problem. As long as you just update your physical address with us, no big deal. So kind of going into the different types of coverage, comparing the RV coverage with our coverage a little bit. So this is kind of best for recreational RVs, tiny houses. So basically, if you have a tiny house and you're using it like an RV coverage is probably just fine. But if you're using it as a primary dwelling, secondary, or even rental, probably not the best fit. These policies typically are actual cash value unless the tiny house is brand new. It can qualify for replacement cost, and that's what the RCV stands for, replacement cost value, if it is brand new. And the unfortunate part is that when you get the replacement cost when it's brand new with a RV insurance policy, if you switch insurance, the new insurance company is not going to offer you replacement cost. So if it's an RV policy to another RV policy, you will lose replacement cost. Our policy is always replacement cost. So if you were coming from an RV policy to our tiny house policy, we'd always offer replacement cost. So there's no penalties there. RV policies typically don't have separate structures, and the personal property is typically actual cash value instead of replacement cost, meaning that if your TV gets stolen and it was $800 new, but used items have a much, like, they depreciate a ton. So maybe you get $200-300 for that TV now. In a replacement cost policy, you'll receive the full $800, or maybe even slightly more to adjust for inflation to get you a TV of similar quality. But that liability, it does range a lot. There's a lot of different types with RV policy. So it can be the auto policy extending to the RV policy when it's being towed. You also have full-time liability, and you also have vacation liability. So depending on how you use it, is going to determine what type of liability is going to apply on the RV policy. With our policy, we just have one straight liability, and it basically covers everything. And like kind of what I mentioned earlier, they do have restrictions, they have exclusions for tiny houses, including mobility. And even then, what I've seen in claims, when an claims adjuster comes and sees the tiny house RV and they see it's doesn't look like an RV, a lot of claims get denied. So they're like, well, it's insured like an RV and it has the RV code, but it doesn't look like an RV. I'm going to deny this claim. This is not something that we're familiar working with. So that does happen a lot. And of course, they can't be used like as rentals, Airbnbs, or secondary properties. They typically have to be used as recreational vehicles. Mobile home park models. So these are typically a lot more stationary, and they're more ideal for park model like parks. So like kind of like a mobile home park, but for park model parks, sometimes these are really popular in resorts or vacation areas. And most of these policies can be a replacement cost, but again, they're kind of stationary only, and provides all the standard coverage that I mentioned earlier. Most tiny houses will not qualify as a park model because it has to be built to a park model code, and it has to usually be also in a park model park. Not an actual, so an RV tiny house will not work. That's a different building code compared to a park model code. So a lot of people tell me, I have a park model tiny house. It's like, okay, and it's over 400 square feet. Or maybe it's a little less than 400 square feet, but it's built to an RV code, which again is not the same thing. And these typically can't be used as a rental in Airbnb. So if you have a traditional park model, that is basically it's not a tiny house, it's a park model, and you use it like a park model, like it's stationary, use it maybe as a vacation spot, or I mean, you can, I guess, use as a primary as well. You can get a park model type of insurance on it, typically no problem. That's kind of what we refer our customers to. That's kind of what we tell them to do. It's like, well, our tiny house program would work, but our tiny house program is more expensive. And basically for the same type of coverage, you could just get a traditional park model type of insurance. So um, it's always not, we're not always the best fit, but we can be a majority of the time. But this is just a pretty traditional type stuff that already exists. And then band conversions. So band conversions are a little bit more complicated because I want to say when we first started insuring tiny houses back in 2016, that was something that we had more flexibility with. The unfortunate thing is that there is a lot of claims in van conversion. So we are pretty limited on what we can offer. A lot of the insurance companies we had before had pulled out of the market because of that. So we can only do Oregon and Washington for our agency. And if you want to have coverage for physical damage, or what people call full coverage, it has to be done by a van conversion specialist. There is people that do it. Yes, it is way more expensive, but you will be able to insure your van conversion properly. So whether you're in an accident or uh, you have some sort of liability claim, it's going to be much easier. If you self-insure a van conversion, we can insure up to $10,000 of customizations, which for some people that might be plenty, but for the really nice schoolies or van conversions, that may not be enough. So we kind of have like our cheapest and most expensive options here. Here you go. So these are kind of the lowest premiums, so kind of liability only here at the top.
Michael, your
Yep.
screen is pretty zoomed in.
My
I think
what?
your screen is zoomed in.
Oh,
If
is
you,
it?
yeah, I don't think we're seeing the full screen.
Oh, okay. Let me see. I I'm not. Let's see here.
Oh, actually, it sounds like Megan said, okay, there we go. Maybe it was just my screen.
Oh, okay.
Sorry
Sorry.
about that.
No worries. So, yeah, we got kind of the cheapest option was liability, then under 10K of customizations and over 10K of customizations. Sometimes that does have to be a commercial auto policy too. So if you are doing these, check with your insurance carrier to see if that's even an option, because a lot of people do these and then have zero luck finding insurance. And it is possible that maybe in your state, you can not find a carrier that will do this because it does vary state to state. I mean, we on our tiny house program, we can insure in all states, but van conversions is a little tougher for us. So talking a little bit about our product versus our competitors. So let's see here. So we do provide a comprehensive homeowners product specifically made for tiny houses. So if you're ever shopping around and you're making a bunch of phone calls and nobody knows what you're talking about, because this does happen a lot. It's like, well, I don't know if we can insure a tiny house. Let me talk to somebody else or whatever. You're not going to have that problem here because we know exactly what you're talking about. We know how to insure it, how to approach it, how to work with lenders if you are working with the lenders. So that's not a problem in our product. Let's see. And of course, other people are going to have to use, if you use an RV or mobile home product, some of it can have exclusions and restrictions. We have replacement costs. Actual cash value most of the time. I would say 90% of the time, they're going to have actual cash value. And of course, if you're using this as your primary home, and if you ever have a loss, I mean, you want to make sure your investment is well taken care of. So we do have the flexibility of that it can be recreational or full-time use, and our competitors, it is going to vary competitor to competitor, but you can use it most of the time, rec use, no problem, but very few options for full-time use and no options for basically rental or Airbnb, where you can with us. You can be completely mobile in our policy, and in other policies, there is mobility restrictions. You have I won't say a local number because it depends on the state, but you do have a number of an agency that you can speak with right away versus the 1-800 number. Okay. So just kind of a little bit of recapping. Um, we offer tiny house insurance, professionally converted van insurance, and that's Oregon, Washington only. And the tiny house insurance we insure all across the country. Same with hard-sided yurts, but I believe we can start insuring soft-sided yurts, which are the more common type yurts. And for our tiny house builders out there, we can insure your general liability, inventory, builder's risk, commercial auto, cargo. So there is a lot of tiny house builders out there that are fairly new to the market. And I would warn to anybody purchasing, do your research, make sure they have a good warranty in place because that is huge. We do get claims where people are like, hey, I just bought my tiny house a year or two ago and I'm having this problem with the roof. It's like, well, that's a warranty issue. That's not an insurance issue because there's been no natural disaster. Been no cause. It just was faulty from the get-go. So you have to contact the builder for that. So a builder who offers a warranty, who has insurance too, because that's a sign of responsibility, is something that I would recommend make sure that your builder has. And because if they don't, well, it's going to be really tough to claim anything against them. And yep, we're licensed in about 45 states. I think we're licensed in 48 now. We do insure in Alaska and Hawaii. I think there's like only a couple states that we really don't insure from anymore. And this is called a DP2 policy, which is basically it's a homeowner's policy. You can Google DP2 homeowner's policy, and it will tell you all the types of coverage that are covered. For the most part, everything's covered for the exception of flood and earthquake, but earthquake can be added on. So we're pretty comprehensive. We'll cover fires, rainstorms, and everything. We do have a restriction on the Gulf Coast and East Coast with wind. You do have to be 75 miles inland if you want wind coverage. So if you have a tiny house on the Gulf Coast, uh, the hurricanes there are probably going to be excluded if it is not 75 miles inland. So just a fair warning. And that's pretty common in all like Gulf Coast Atlantic type property insurance. So we do have the only tiny house homeowners insurance product on the market. We can insure self-built and non-certified tiny houses, stationary or mobile. So that was pretty much it. I think I'm right on almost at 12 or sorry, 1 o'clock Pacific. Um, so I see there's a few chat bubbles here. I'll try to answer any questions as quickly as possible. Let me see. So I'll try to answer this. My property has an ADU and a tiny house on a foundation. Can the tiny be insured by a different company? I hope to do. So for this kind of stuff, if it's that's a really good question. I did not bring up ADUs because ADUs typically are not tiny houses. So in a tiny house on a foundation, I would assume that's the ADU. But if it's a tiny house on foundation on a property that you own and you have a homeowner's policy on it, your homeowner's policy should cover it as a separate structure. If it does not want to insure it as a separate structure or as a rental, yes, we can insure it. That's not a problem, but we recommend do it with your homeowner's insurance too, especially if it's on a foundation in your property. Let's see. What's the medium cost of a 10 by 20 tiny house with limited bells and whistles? It just depends on the replacement cost and the type of coverage you're looking for. But for every $10,000 in coverage, I would say it's about $110. So $100,000 tiny house is probably $1,100 a year at least. And that's depending on if you want to add bells and whistles onto your insurance policy or not. Someone mentioned what states we do not cover. I think Illinois is one of them, and I don't remember the other one right now, but we basically insure almost in every state.
Awesome, Michael. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that information and kind of the ins and outs of everything people need to know about insuring their tiny home and kind of all the exclusions that most of the other insurance products offer and whatnot. So it's really important to know what you're actually insuring and so on. So
Well,
super appreciative of your time and jumping on here and whatnot and educating everybody. And also, like Michael said, if you guys need insurance, you guys know who to contact now. So make sure to reach out to Michael. He can share his contact information there and whatnot. But yeah, Michael, really, really appreciate it.
yeah, I'm gonna put my number here in the chat. If anybody has any questions, and you can, and I'll also put our website, tinyhouseinsurance.info. And we do cover North Carolina, and no, it does not have to be RVIA certified. Well, for RV insurance, it does have to be RVIA certified. So I think that was the last two questions in there.
Yep, awesome, awesome. Well, thanks so much, Michael. We really appreciate it, and we'll be in touch. And yeah, everybody, reach out to Michael for your insurance.
Yep. Thank you guys. You guys have a good one.
Yep, for sure.